Hello and welcome to Crucible of Words for more dedicated Legacy action. Today we're looking at the new set Marvel's Spider-Man and looking at what I think are the top 10 cards most likely to see play in Legacy. Now this is a standard legal set, so we're not expecting lots of big haymakers for Legacy, but we're trying to choose from what is available. Also, I should note that for the online version of the Spider-Man set, it's actually an in-universe set called Through the Omen Paths, so I will be putting the Through the Omen Paths version of these cards side by side with the Spider-Man version, just so that you can familiarise yourself with what they look like online. First up, we have Scarlet Spider Kane. So this is a 2-mana 2/1 with Menace. When it enters, you may discard a card. If you do, it gets a +1/+1 counter. But you can Mayhem it for just 1 mana. So the Mayhem is like Madness, where if you discard this card this turn, you can play it for its Mayhem cost. But you still have to play it at the normal timing, and you can play it from the graveyard at any point in the remaining turn, as long as you abide by the timings. So if you were to discard this at instant speed, you wouldn't be able to play it at instant speed. You have to still play it at sorcery speed because it's a creature. So why do I think this one is interesting? Well, it's a cheap cost for what can be a 3/2 body that also enables stuff. So it's a bit like a payoff because it's going to get you something for discarding cards. You're going to end up with value because the thing you're discarding is actually going to be putting a creature into play. But then this can also let you discard something else. And we've seen the Madness deck in Legacy pop up every now and then. It's not a great deck, but maybe if it gets enough tools, it can do something interesting. But this is just a reasonable rate that you can get whilst doing other things that your deck might want to do. I don't really think it's going to see Legacy play, but like I said, this is a standard set, so pickings are a little slim. And Menace is a pretty important keyword, which puts it above some of the Root Wallers, which just get blocked these days in Legacy. Next up, we have Electro Assaulting Battery. This is a 3-mana 2/3 flyer in red. You don't lose unspent red mana at steps and phases end, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you add red. When it leaves the battlefield, you may pay X. When you do, he deals X damage to target player. So this is just going to allow you to build up a bunch of mana, which you can then funnel into whatever you want. But then if they ever deal with this creature, because it leaves the battlefield, it means you'll always get the chance to then dome your opponent for a whole bunch. Now, I don't think this card is good enough. We have Bergie, which is just better for the decks that want this generating a load of mana effect, because it can give you a bunch of mana, whilst also having the backside, which allows you to get a load of cards in the Horn of Harnfell. But I think people will try this out. I think in the end it will not be as good as the options we do have, but I think people will definitely give it a whirl. Next one is Carnage Crimson Chaos. So this is 2 black-red for a 4/3 Trampler. When it enters, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains, this creature attacks each combat if able, and when this creature deals combat damage to a player, sacrifice it. But it has that Mayhem ability for black and a red. This means that for just 2 mana, you can get a 4/3 and another mana value 3 or less creature from your graveyard into play. That's quite a lot of rate for one card. Even by Legacy standards, 2 mana for a 4/3 plus like a Barrogoyf or something is really good. Now, you do have to enable this, but you could enable it with things like Putrid Imp and stuff like that. So maybe you can have some interesting synergies going on there. But I think part of the problem with cards that look like this is Legacy isn't that much about synergy right now because the power level is so high. Having something like this, like a few years back, might have been a viable way to approach things. But now I think it's just going to be a little bit too cute and dependent on other things going right when you could just, have a Barrogoyf as your creature slot instead of trying to do all of this. But it's interesting, and if someone can find a nice shell where you can get all the value and turn your draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards into just draw 2 cards and put a load of stuff into play, then that'd be pretty sweet. Once again, we have another Mayhem card. So this is Swarm Being of Bees. So this is a 3-mana 2/2 flash flyer, and its Mayhem is just black. So this is a pretty good rate. So just a 1-mana 2/2 flyer is not bad going if you're drawing and discarding cards anyway. There is also a creature from one of the, I think it was one of the Modern Horizon sets that kind of is pretty much the same as this card, except it has Madness. So having redundancy of effect could be kind of interesting here, and you could just turn a Careful Study into, actual card advantage and things. I also quite like the Swarm character from Spider-Man. But the rate on this one is certainly interesting. Again, it's pretty low power level by Legacy standards, but that's what we're dealing with because it is a standard set. Next up, we have Hobgoblin Mantled Marauder. So this is a 2-mana 1/2 flying haste. Whenever you discard a card, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Now, we've seen the Madness deck, like I mentioned earlier, in Legacy before. It hasn't been good for a while, but this is a tool that could definitely slot into this. You could easily see playing this and then casting, let's say, I don't know, a Breakthrough, and then you draw 4 cards and discard your hand. So let's say you discard 8 cards. That's 16 power. This could just kill people out of nowhere, and it's kind of interesting. It does have some big splashy combo potential. Like if you pair this with a bunch of Madness cards and, like I said, the Breakthrough, you could quite easily be killing people on turn 2 or 3 if the stars align in the right way. So it's an interesting card that has a very high ceiling. Now obviously a 1/2 creature isn't necessarily going to be setting the world on fire, but the fact is we can pump this in a big way, and it's going to be a fun one to mess around with. I'm looking forward to playing. And I have fond memories of Hobgoblin from the Spider-Man cartoon in the 90s that I watched a lot. Alright, it's our obligatory 1-mana artifact for Urza's Saga purposes from the new set. Every set basically has a 1-mana artifact that you think, maybe this works with Urza's Saga. So today's offering is Peter Parker's Camera. This is a 1-mana artifact that comes in with 3 film counters. You can pay 2 and tap it, remove a counter, and then copy target activated or triggered ability you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. So, what you can do with this, you're playing in an Urza's Saga deck already, so you could just, I don't know, make an additional construct if you've got the mana, or you could make an additional tutor if you've got the mana when it's popping off. So there's a lot of flexibility to what this card can do. Now, is this something that you actually want in the deck? Uncertain. Like, it can help you double up on Wastelands, I suppose, because you can copy the Wasteland activated ability and then Wasteland something else. So maybe there's a slot for this in some sort of lands deck. But I think the Urza's Saga slots are pretty tight right now because you need to have, your Pithing Needles, your equipment for your constructs, also your Graveyard Hate. There's quite a lot of different things vying for the limited spaces in deck. But I imagine people will try this out, and whether or not it comes in clutch and useful, we'll find out together. On to Shadow of the Goblin. This is 1 and a red enchantment. At the beginning of your first main phase, discard a card. If you do, draw a card. And then the other ability is whenever you play a land or cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, this enchantment deals 1 damage to each opponent. So why am I interested in this card? Well, if you watch my channel, you might know that I'm quite fond of playing Food Chain in Legacy. And Food Chain uses Unstable Amulet, which has the text line, whenever you play a spell from exile, you deal 1 damage to your opponent. And this is the same text, except this gives you a loot, or a rummage, I guess, as we're calling it these days, every single turn, so it can find you your combo whilst also being part of your combo. Now, the Unstable Amulet does effectively draw you a card, so that one cantrips, so it's probably better than Shadow of the Goblin, but I want to try this out and we can maybe get some interesting synergies going, because discarding a card can end up being card advantage. If we're discarding something like a Squee, then we can just, have that wherever it is and we get to use it whenever we want. Things like Uro that we can put into the graveyard as well, we don't mind milling that one over. So I think this definitely has some interesting differences compared to the Unstable Amulet, and enchantments are harder to kill than artifacts, which is somewhat relevant too. Alright, now we're getting to the good stuff. This is Sandman Shifting Scoundrel. This is 1 green for a creature that has power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. It can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, so that's Orcish Bowmaster tokens. It's things like Tameo, can't just chump block it for a turn. Numidian Hatchery tokens, plenty of things that aren't going to be able to block this, so you're going to be able to leverage the damage it can bring. But the really interesting part is the ability. 3 green, return this card and target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So this card is going to end up in your graveyard just through the natural play patterns of Life from the Loam and Malevolent Rumble. So at some point, you're going to end up with this in your graveyard. You're probably going to have 5 mana, so you can tutor a land from your graveyard into play. And you also get this big body as well. Now, it does come in tapped, so it can't block the turn it comes in, and the land you get does come in tapped. But if you're getting, I don't know, Field of the Dead and producing some zombie tokens, that's going to be getting you some power and some ways to block. And, you're still just tutoring for things you want. And if you have a lot of mana, maybe you can just tutor for your Dark Depths. You already have the Thespian stage and the mana to activate it. This is a really sweet card, and I love stuff like this. I don't think it's going to be breaking lands decks anytime soon, but I wouldn't be surprised if one of these, possibly even 2 of them, end up becoming a relatively common sight in some lands decks for a while. It's just another interesting angle because you already have like the Life from the Loam and the Malevolent Rumble. It's just like another piece on top of that of inevitability. Now, the format is quite fast, so whether or not you need this sort of inevitability compared to what lands already has is not really something I'm sure about. But there's always a possibility that the format slows down when we possibly get some bans at the next restricted update, which has now been moved forward as well to, I think it's the 10th of November, so after the first Eternal weekend this year. So maybe things could slow down, which means you want more stuff like this for your late game. But I think it's a really cool card, and I do want to play with this one. It's a sort of card I really enjoy. Okay, Steel Wrecking Ball is our next entry. This is an artifact that costs 5 mana. When this artifact enters, it deals 5 damage to target creature. And you can pay 1 and a red to discard it from your hand to destroy target artifact. Now, why do I think this card is useful? Well, Painter's Servant decks love this sort of thing. So it puts itself in the graveyard whilst doing useful things, but it does need to have a target. So sometimes it might be a little bit awkward in terms of your own bits and pieces getting blown up if you want to put this in the graveyard. So it might be more of a sideboard card. But once it's in the graveyard, you can get your Goblin Welder to bring it back and dome something for 5. And then you just have this little engine where you can just keep bringing it back and just killing all the creatures. Now, they already have Chaos Defiler, which can do a similar job, but this is in proper mono red, so you don't even need to try and splash any black sources in your deck for the Chaos Defiler. Now, the Chaos Defiler is also more flexible, but this does have an uncounterable way of destroying Null Rod, which can be a bit of a problem for some Painter decks as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some Painter decks trying this out. The Painter community is always trying out new tech. So we're probably going to see this a little bit, and then we'll work out if it's going to be a thing that you actually want in your deck or not after a couple of weeks. Lastly, we have Spider Punk. This is my pick for the card that's probably most likely to see Legacy play. This is 1 and a red for a 2/1 with Riot. Riot means it either enters with haste or with a +1/+1 counter. Entering with a +1/+1 counter means that it's not going to be dying to Orcish Bowmasters anymore, which is kind of a big deal. It has a line of text saying other spiders you control have Riot, which is basically flavor text here. The other 2 lines are pretty good though. Spells and abilities can't be countered. So this is like your own little defense grid. Your stuff is not getting counterspelled. You're also not having to worry about things like Stifle and Consign to Memory on your abilities that are triggering. So that's pretty sweet. And also, damage can't be prevented. Now, there is a card that is a significant thorn in the side of the Legacy format, which is the One Ring, which has the line of text that you get protection. That means damage is prevented. However, if damage can't be prevented due to Spiderpunk, your opponent's fog that they got off of their One Ring doesn't matter. And maybe they're thinking, oh, I'm going to play this One Ring and sit behind it for a turn, and that's going to be fine. But then you play this Spiderpunk from hand, you give it haste because it's got Riot, and then you get to swing for 2 extra damage, plus whatever else you had on board. And maybe you finish your opponent off, and that One Ring fog that they were relying on doesn't work anymore. So that is a pretty sweet card. Now, the question is, where does this go? That's my one reservation about this, because what deck actually wants this? You could play some sort of like Ruby-ish Storm deck, maybe? But that deck is pretty good against counterspells anyway, which is one of the reasons people like to play it, because it has so much redundancy and gets so many additional cards that it kind of just gets to play through counterspells quite often. But, you know, you still wouldn't mind having a little bit more help for that. You don't really have a red aggressive deck that isn't also playing counterspells in the form of like Blue-Red Delver, for example. So I think this is a good legacy quality card, but I don't think it has a home yet. But if someone finds one, that would be pretty sweet. So this could go in the Artist Talent style combo deck. I'm not sure. But this card has a lot of juice to squeeze out of it if we can find a place that actually can play it. Alright, so that's my pick of the top 10 cards that might see playing in Legacy. I don't expect very many of them, if any, to be honest, to see consistent play as Legacy staples, but I think people will try some of them out, and maybe they'll be better than I think. But again, this is a standard legal set, so we can't expect big changes to the Legacy format from the cards that are being added, but that's actually a good thing. We don't really want giant changes to the Legacy format with every standard set, but it's nice to see a few new cards that might be interesting to play around with. And if you would like to see somebody playing around with these cards, by all means, like this video and subscribe to my channel, because I'm going to be playing some of these new cards as soon as I get my hands on them. Alright, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye. If you'd like to support me in the channel, please check out my Patreon. It has a free guide to budget turbo depths, as well as 3 tiers of support. A low cost one that enters you into my monthly raffle for a free donation deck on the channel, a mid-tier subscription that gives you access to my detailed turbo depths guide that is updated every month, as well as regular articles, and lastly, the higher tier gives you all of the above, as well as a monthly donation deck for my channel. If you're interested in supporting the channel this way, please check out the link in the description.